This video will be doing the front blade of the bulldozer. As you can see, there's a very big blade at the front of the bulldozer with some interesting geometrical detail. This won't be too hard to model, but it will make for an interesting challenge. We're just going to start off with a plane. I'm not going to start with a box because a plane is easier due to the curved front of the blade, which is one of the more interesting parts to model on this object. Flipping things around, I want to work on the right side of this part, and immediately I'm adding some subdivisions so that I can change the shape around a little bit. It's important to note that I'm going to model this part straight first, and once the straight modeling is done, I will be bending it using a modifier. Right now I'm just moving these parts around a little bit, and this is just prep work for the geometrical detail that will be modeled on top of this blade. As you can see, we're starting to add some detail by extruding a little bit, keeping in mind to delete the sides as we don't need those. We'll place some other objects against that to hide the open sides. This blade is curved in a number of ways. It's curved over its X and Y axis. So we need to make sure we do both of these curvatures. What's interesting here is also there's a sort of indented line along the blade, and we need to add some geometry to support this line. Just moving this around. Very important to move this with Shift X at the edge constraint on. Small indent for this interesting detail. This is one of the more complex shapes, and as you can see, I've just used existing wires, modify them around, move them around a little bit to give me that basic shape. For that, it's a few more edges to make sure that things are rounded the way I like it. And then I'm just going to copy the Turbo Smooth and paste it on top. I'm just checking this out, and this looks mostly okay. Just a few small changes needed. It needs to be moved upwards a little bit. And I want it to be a little bit stronger and sharper on the outsides there. Adding a few subdivisions here just to make sure that the geometry is evenly spread. And with that done, adding the bend modifier and setting it to the right angle. As you can see, it takes a little bit of experimenting. You can never get this correct right away. Depends on how you created the object, etc. As you can see, I had to rotate over the y-axis at a 90-degree direction and then just change the angle to change the effect you want. Moving the pivot slightly upwards. I don't want to move it back and forth as that actually sort of scales the object, which is something I want to avoid. There we go. Make it slightly bigger. And move these out a little bit like that. Just spread them a little bit more evenly because it actually influences the curvature. As you can see, I added my bend underneath my Turbo Smooth, and mostly that's not really a problem. That looks nice now. Just at the top there we had a slide problem. I think maybe I will have to move these a little bit apart. There we go. I'll try to do the same thing here. With that done, I'm adding an edit poly on top of the bend, which is important because I just want to keep the bend in case I want to adjust something. And I'm using that mesh to actually continue my work from. I'm just selecting one of the open edges and then shift moving it. Right here, I'm just adjusting the shape a little bit, moving them up and down. Lining all these vertices. There we go, that looks good. And this looks about right. I'm moving these over to what I think on the blueprints is a matching location. And then it's just tweaking these a little bit to get some thickness in here. There we go, that looks like it's about correct. It's a little bit hard to select all of this, but it's doable. Something like that. I'm not really sure what this shape looks like in real life, so I'm just moving things around, and I'll see what it looks like while I'm working on it. If it turns out to be not, well, if I can't use it, then I'll just change things around and create something better. As you can see, I'm trying to get everything in a single line here, and once I've done that, this looks pretty good. So I'm just going to add these extra edges here, and I'm only adding these once I'm happy with the shape. So there you are. I'll move this a little bit forward. And I've created another little primitive here, which is a box. And this box will simply serve to create the big panel on the side of the bulldozer blade. I'm going to extrude. And as you can see here, I'm not really following the blueprints anymore that you see in the background. I'm more going by the reference pictures. As I've told you before, the blueprints are for the civilian version, and there are quite a few differences between the civilian and the military version. So this side part of the blade is the military version. There's a little hole here, which is interesting. It's a little bit tough to create using an inset, and then I'm just simply going to adjust all these positions. Using a spherify modifier, then using a spherify modifier on the other side again. We are deleting these, selecting the open gaps, and then just capping them. And there you are, we have an open hole there. Just quickly going to put a loop around them, and then 2 loops on the inside. I'm adding an extra loop here, and the reason for that being I need to add some extra detail here. I need to be able to chamfer this, because if I didn't do this, then that corner would have been rounded, while now it'll be kept sharp. Okay, I'll just extrude this and carefully move these around. This part isn't too tough because it's mostly flat, but it's got a bit of a complex shape, so we have to make sure that our flow, even though it's in a flat surface, is still correct for the sort of shape we want to achieve. Just moving these around to get that sharp front. There's a little bit of a problem with the spacing here due to the nature of the geometry, so we're just moving that around a little bit to get it right. There we are, that looks okay, but there's still a lot of work to do. That looks tweaked correctly. I'm going to remove these because I don't really think they're going the correct way. I'm just going to select these 2. And there we go, we also have quads, and it looks better. We don't need to have that really stretched geometry over there. Plus, my loops can actually run in a more logical way, so that's better too. And we're just tweaking the shape, and when that's done, we're going to add a few loops around so that it's rounded off nicely. So I think that part looks okay. I'm going to start with another part here. This one's not hard, it's just a plate. That's chamfered nicely, but the only difference being with solid plate is that there are quite a few holes in there. Just like a whole series of small round holes in there. So I'm actually going to have to add those too. So I'm just adding geometry to use as a base for that. And then I'm just going to select every single polygon in which I want a hole to appear. So that's all of these. And then do an inset by polygon. And as you can see, they're a little bit rectangular. Even though the basic shape looked square, strange stuff can happen. I'm just connecting them and performing another inset to round them off. There you are. Attaching it, changing the color to something correct. The symmetry pivot wasn't correct, so I just moved that around. And there we have the basic setup for our blade already. It's starting to look like something. Now this is a little bit more of a difficult part. It's a plate that sits at the side, but it's all rotated. It has holes, and its shape is more difficult than a simple box. So we're going to have to move that around a little bit. We use parent space to move this. Slightly rotate it. I think this one actually needs to be hidden. I need to move these around. As I could tell by the reference picture, this line was running straight. If it curves upward, it's not running straight. So what I have to do is move this around slightly, get it to match the reference more. It's a more interesting shape than just using the default layout. With that done, I can get back to working on the object itself. Performing another extrude here. Why is that? This part's actually slightly thicker, and it actually goes over the side of the blade, which makes it an even more complex shape. That's this sort of pointy shape on the outside, and I need to make sure I get this right. This might be one of the more difficult parts of the front blade. Adding all of these nicely. And then adding my support edges. There we are. Add an extra support edge there. And just everywhere where it makes sense. Just something you should really start to grasp by now. So these are a few extra subdivisions to get some more detail in there. Get the rounding right. Okay, trying to get these in a bit of a logical order. And okay, these look okay too. Right, so there are a few holes in here, and I'm just going to have to create those. The thing is, they need to be perfectly square before I can create decent holes out of them, so that involves a lot of moving of vertices. Move these a little bit so that they look more like squares instead of trapeziums. Okay. This looks okay. The holes might be a little bit big, so I think I'm going to change that. Just using this selection. Trying to get the right selection here. There we are. Deleting that. I think also the holes need to be closed. They'll look better because it's strange that you can see through and see the shape behind it. So I'm just going to close them off. An extra inset to make sure that shape looks correct. That's about right. And these deeper ones, I don't like them being so deep, so I'm moving these up slightly. And adding a few extra edges to make sure that this is all rounded off the right way. There's like an extra thicker edge around there, so that's what I'm creating here. With a simple bevel. Yeah, and that looks like it's the right shape. Okay, so since that's a complex part with a complex rotation, I'm not sure if I'm going to attach it to the other one yet. Right now I'm just adding a few more points here to get the shape correct. And there's also this slight thicker part at the bottom of this this mesh. There we go. That looks correct. It was rounded in the reference, so I'm trying to mimic that shape. So now I'm mirroring it to the other side, and I'm going to continue work on the back of this blade here. This is quite a bit easier than the other part because we don't have any strange rotations or intersecting objects here. I'm actually making it easy for myself. I'm not even continuing the mesh from the front part of the blade. Why? Because, well, there's just a ton of subdivisions there because of all the sharp lines in the blade. And since I don't need those, I'm just going to go out of their way and avoid them altogether by using a simple mesh. As you can see, this looks pretty easy. A little remark here is I'm keeping that simple at the back, but I'll need to add some more detail there later on because all the attachments for the front blade, they all attach there. There are tons of arms and linkages that attach to the back. So we're not done with that part yet, just the basic onset of it. Now, this part, interesting also, on the top of the blade, there's this sort of, how would I call it? It's a protective part that makes sure that no debris flies over the blade onto the linkage behind it. Sort of like a little bit of a fence sort of thing. And they're just square iron bars with a few bars in between that protect this part. So what I'm doing here, if they're just simple bars, then I can just simply create this from spline. So that's what I'm doing here. Adjusting the points in 3D space, because it's not flat. There's actually differences in all axes. We're going to use the subdivisions. They're slightly rounded, so I'm trying to mimic that. There's an extra part there. I need to move over as well. Go. That looks good. Right, so what I need to do now is draw all the straight bars in between there. I could just draw one and use it for the rest. Requires a little bit of tweaking to get it to align nicely. Also, one thing that's a little bit tricky here is the green one at this moment, I would like to have it a little bit smaller than the pink ones. But if I attach them together, which is something I definitely want to do since it's easier to work with a single object, then a spline requires everything to have the same thickness. You can't have separate segments with a different thickness than the rest. So it's a little bit limiting, but I think with some tweaking work, I can get everything to align nicely. Or another way around it would be like doing here, is to just convert them to editable pulleys and move the verts around so that you don't notice the problem. And this is a bit of an annoying part. I say annoying because it's mostly the same with just a ton of annoying tweak work. Is all of these bars, they have this alternating pattern with some of them don't extend towards the back, and some of them do extend towards the back in this triangular shape at their back. I need to create like every single one of them. And you'll see if I look at the reference, then the pattern it isn't always the same. It changes. Some of them are larger than others, etc. So definitely requires a lot of tweaking and looking at reference. Then again, it's not hard to make. It's just a little bit tedious. This one needs to be moved there, so it's bigger. And I need to move these slightly inwards. I need to do the same with that one. I want to make sure that everything lines up nicely. As you can see here, then there's 2 bars. And then next to the 2 bars, there's another big extending one. on the support bars. There's one in the center there. Right next to that, a smaller one here, and another two of these. I'm just going to move these around. I'm actually spacing these by just eyeballing it. You could go all the way and use some sort of grid to space them all nicely. I'm not doing that. It looks nice enough like this. And I just attach everything together. Applying an edit pulley to this line so that I can add all the extra lines for subdivision in here. But I can't forget to delete the end parts of this line because these silly things prevent me from adding accurate loops. And then delete that inside. Alright, so with that done, I'm just going to attach everything together here. And I need to make sure that the center one, that I actually delete 1/2, because it's going to give me problems if I don't. I'll get intersection with the symmetry. There you go. Big mesh on the top. I like how that adds a lot of interesting detail.